Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Northwest Craftsman. Today we're going to be doing the second joint of our joint series, which is the half lap joint. In a second here, I'm going to do some voiceover work to kind of show you guys the advantages and disadvantages and all the other details that you need to know about the joint so that you can compare it to other joints and choose what is going to be best for your project. After that, I'm going to go through and do a tutorial on how to build the joint specifically so that you can, with any tools in your shop, do what you need to do to make this joint. All right, let's get started. A half-lap joint is pretty simple in that it joins the two pieces of wood on some central plane just by mating the two faces. Now, some of the advantages to joining wood this way is that it's easy, it is strong when glued, and it has a slightly more finished look than, say, a butt joint. Some of the disadvantages, though, are that it requires glue, it does not mechanically hold itself together, and it can be difficult to cut the face. There's a variety of different ways that you can do it, and sometimes it's hard to get that face perfectly flat so you get a good glue seam. Some of the categories that this joint fits into is a corner, as you can see in the thumbnail right here. It does not really fit well into a box, though there is a variation that is similar to a half-lap joint that is called a rabbet joint. It also works as a structural joint, although it is closer to a flat dado joint if you're going to do it there. Rather than being on the corner like you see here, you do it in the middle of your workpiece. And then for an edge, you run into the same issue that you do with a box, where it's more of a rabbet joint than it is a true half-lap joint, though they're very similar in the way that they're constructed. For complexity, the half-lap ranks at 2 out of 5, which is not all that difficult to make. It's a really simple joint overall. However, strength, once it's glued, is more of a 3 out of 5. It can hold quite a bit of weight and quite a bit of stress because you've got a very large surface area that you're gluing, and a glued joint is a very strong joint. Some other things to keep in mind is that the face can be cut in a variety of different ways, including a router, a table saw, by hand, or really any other way that you can think to try and cut these two faces. It's a pretty flexible joint in how you can make it. Something else that isn't noted here is that this joint can be mitered, though it is a little bit more complicated. There's kind of 3 unique steps that you have to go through to get it, but it does look really nice in the end, and it is just as strong as the regular half-lap joint. And with that final note, let's go ahead and start making it. So after my workpieces are dimensioned and ready to go, one of the things that I like to do is just set them together in a similar manner so that I can see roughly how they're going to come together and kind of visualize about how much space they're going to take. In this case, I can see that I'm going to be taking the bottom half of this top piece of wood and then the top half of the bottom piece of wood so that they fit together, and they should be exactly the same thickness if you want all of your faces to be flush when you're done with the joint. So I'm using the table saw method in this, but the same process would be followed if you're using a router. Hand tools are a little bit different, but we'll get to that momentarily. So to get the correct depth set on my blade, and you can do this on your router table as well, I have one of these vertical gauges that I'll have linked in the description, but it allows you to zero it out on your table and then move it over the top of your blade, and you want to make sure that you get the apex of your blade with one of the teeth, and you get the right height off of it, and so you can get really fine depth control during this process. Once you have the correct depth set on your blade, you want to go ahead and measure the width of your workpiece because this is going to be how far you need to cut back for your half-lap joint. In this case, I've got a 3-inch piece, which means that I'm going to be going 3 inches deep. I only ever mark this on a single piece because then I end up setting the fence to the correct depth, and you can actually bypass this process as well if you just want to measure straight from the fence to the edge of your blade. So here you can see I transferred that marking over to the edge so that as I'm coming up to the edge of the blade, I can see exactly where it's going to hit. Don't forget to take into account the fact that your kerf is going to take out thickness, so which side of your pencil line you are putting the blade on does actually matter. This is one benefit of measuring directly from your fence, because you go to the fence side of your blade and you get exactly the thickness you need. Once that's all set up, you're ready to start cutting. I like to go ahead and start with something that's close to the center of my workpiece because that gives me a little bit of wood out on the edge that's right next to the fence right now to support it all the way through the cutting so that it's not possible for my workpiece to dip down further into the blade, taking a chunk out. I would also like to acknowledge that my workpieces are just about too short to be working on power tools, and I had to take extra precautions throughout the entire process to make sure that my hand stayed totally clear of the blade. Always take the proper safety precautions when you're working with power tools because you can lose a finger or much worse very, very quickly. The rest of the process is pretty simple. You're just going to continue to run your workpiece over the top of this, cutting out a little bit of material every time. If you have a dado stack, it'll go a little bit faster because it's going to be hogging out more material at once, although I would definitely not recommend working with something this small if you've got a dado stack. And it's going to go a little bit faster if you're on a router table because your bit is going to have a larger diameter than this blade. So if you're doing this by hand, you're going to follow almost all the exact same steps. You're basically going to mark it all the way down all the edges, and then you're going to do, it's not really a rip cut, but it's kind of a remilling cut down the middle to hog out a good chunk of the material, and then you're going to meet it from the top with a cross cut. Make sure to give yourself plenty of slack on either side because you're going to be using a chisel or a plane to get your final dimensions on this, and the more material you have, the more difficult it is. But we're going to be going through a similar fine-tuning step after this process with a chisel. It's just going to be removing a lot less material because the table saw did most of the material hogging. And here's what the finished product looks like. You can see here that everything fits pretty nicely. There's a small lip right here, and there's two potential causes to that. One is that my blade was not set to the correct depth, and I always like to err on the side of it being cut too shallow so that you get a lip like this. But it could also be that there's still a little bit of debris left over, and we need to trim that up with a chisel. The blade that I currently have on my table saw is an alternating top bevel, which is good for a variety of cuts, although it doesn't give you the smoothest finish because you have that alternating top. For the best possible finish using this method, you'd want to go with a flat top grind. And if you're using a router table, you probably won't have to worry about this because the surface finish off a router table is usually much better than that of a table saw. Once everything is cleaned up, you're ready to glue it, and it's the same as everything else. You want to make sure that you slather on enough glue that it squeezes out of the different openings, and then clean it up before it gets dry because it's going to be easier to clean up now while it's wet than when it's dry and you have to try and chip it off. So now that we have the regular half lap done, I'm going to show you guys how to do a mitered half lap joint, which is just a little bit more complicated, but happens in 3 easy steps. So a quick freeze frame so that we can zoom in on this. There are 3 separate cuts/steps that you need to make to do this. The first one is to hog out a regular half lap joint similar to what we did previously right here. Second, with the blade set to that depth still, you're going to cut this 45 out and hog it. And then lastly, you're going to trim off all of the excess on this 45 right here so that it fits smoothly on top. Now, don't feel bad if it's a little bit hard to visualize this right now. I had to dry the 2 45-degree lines on my piece of wood and make sure that they were going to line up perfectly when I did this. And this is not my first attempt trying to make this happen. So do it on some scrap pieces of wood first so that you have time to practice, so that when you do it on your actual piece, it's going to be just great. And even here you can see that hairline gap in that 45, which means that my tolerances were still not quite perfect. However, all things considered, it went really well, and I'm happy with the way that these 2 joints turned out. I hope that you learned a little bit more about the half lap joint today and can use it in some of your woodworking in the near future. Thank you guys for joining me. I really appreciate it. If you like the kind of content we're producing here at Northwest Craftsman, we'd really appreciate a thumbs up on the video and a subscribe to the channel. Our community is just growing, and I'm absolutely loving it. So thank you guys if you've already subscribed to the channel, and we would love to have you as a part of the community if you aren't already here. At any rate, thank you guys for joining. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day or night, depending on when you're watching this, and we'll see you next time. Bye.